Here we are with Mr. Dr. Anthony Nobles, the inventor, patent holder, and very world-renowned man who invented the heart stitch and who has a massive collection of amazing cars, successful F1 driver, and just all-around good guy, family man, wonderful individual. We're going to be visiting with him for a few minutes about his car collection. And I appreciate you giving us the opportunity to sell some of them today here on Sonicbidder. I would like you to give me just give me a quick description of, how you come about some of these cars, your passion for the cars, and we're going to talk about what we think that we feel the market's going to do. We're going to have a little fun here today and have a little video that we're going to cut up into a TV show here. How's that? First of all, Dr. Nobles, we had this beautiful Auburn. Now, I'm sitting there looking at muscle cars, BMW M1s, the amazing 275 GTB in the background, all your high-end supercars, and then all of a sudden I see an Auburn in the corner. Tell me how that came about.
Well, it's kind of an interesting story. In all my companies, particularly my medical device companies, I come across lots of different kinds of people over the years, and whether they be physicians, patients, or customers. And sometimes they're just investors in the company. And along the way, I had developed a relationship with an investor who was a good friend. And he himself was a car, I guess you'd call him a dealer. He sold cars. He had a beautiful little company back east that sold a lot of antique cars. And through all of our communications, as he was becoming an investor in my company, he had shown me some of his cars. And, as you know, because you've seen my collection, I don't have very many of your like Chevelles or Bel Airs or those types of cars. And as I'm looking at his website, the one car on the front that seemed out of place was this beautiful Auburn. And I saw it and I thought, not normally my era, not normally a car I would have picked, but I just fell in love with it. It was so stunningly beautiful, that burgundy color, that little champagne accent, and it had a rumble seat, and it was so well restored and in such great condition. When I opened up and looked at the engine, which it looks exactly the same today, that painted green engine with that somebody loved this car and meticulously built it. So I fell in love with the car. I told him I have to have it. We made a deal. I bought that car quite some time ago. God, it's been at least, I think, more than 10 or 12 years ago. And when it got here, the very first thing I did is I took it out and drove it in the 4th of July parade with our congressman in the back seat. And I just got a kick out of it. It's such a stunning car. And at the time, I also had a 1931 Rolls-Royce 2530, one of the only other cars like that I had that was an old car. And it was this horrible beige and burgundy color thing. It was just a mess. And the Auburn was so stunning that it inspired me and I'm the second owner on this 1931 car. That's how long I had it. I took this Rolls Royce out and I said to the guys doing the restoration, I said, see this Auburn? I want that Rolls Royce to look like this Auburn. I want the same color, the same accents, pull those painted wire wheels off, chrome them, make it look like it. And I love them both. So it's a phenomenal car. It can sit for a year. You get in, it starts right up, you drive it. It's fun to drive. It's a lot easier to drive than the old Rolls Royce. It's just a great car. I think it's one of the most beautiful cars in the world.
Well, I have to tell you, I'm an Auburn fan, always have been, and that 898 is something that I really love, and 31 was a significant year for the Auburn. And so having it in our opportunity to sell in your collection and it being kind of something that was the oddball of the collection makes me like it even more. So, if everybody wants an opportunity to see a really nice Auburn 31 898A coming out of the Nobles collection, please take the opportunity to check us out on the web at thevaultms.com or check us out on sonicbidder.com. It's all going to be there for a show and it's going to be sold. One thing I would like to do, if we can, Dr. Nobles, is explain what this car really is. I know it's a real car, but we've had several people ask us Sterling Moss history, if we got documentation of this car, and Sterling Moss driving it and Lance Reventlo and all that. So if we can get that story told, that's what we want to tell.
Okay, so well, let me tell you a little bit about this car. How I came across this car was very interesting. I was racing in Europe in both the Ferrari F1 Cliente and in the Masters, Formula One Historics, and in the Formula Juniors. And as I was racing through Europe, I was looking at, I wanted a competitive car in each one of these different venues. And when I looked at the Prix 61 class of Formula One race cars, there were two cars winning every year. One of them was a Ferrari Dino, which I approached the owner and tried to buy it, and he still to this day won't sell it. But the car that kept beating him, though, the two of them were neck and neck a lot, but the guy who kept winning was a guy named Julian Bronson, who basically was driving a Scarab. And as I approached him, I started asking him about this car when I realized it was the first ever American Formula One car. Of course, that caught my attention going, wow, okay, now I really got to have one of these. And he told me, well, the problem is there's only 3 in the world, only 2 that were ever raced in period. The third one being what he was racing. Julian Bronson was racing the car that was built but never finished, being introduced into the series because they switched from front engine to rear engine. And at that time, that his third car.
Now they changed the front engine to rear engine in what, 64, 63?
No, 1960. So it was a transfer in 19.
Okay.
Yeah, 58, 59, and then I think it was 60 that they used the front engines, and 61 they switched to the rear engines, or it was 60 or 61. I'd have to look to be exactly sure. But so this car, which was raced extensively, it was raced by Chuck Day and by Lance Reventlo. And for those who just really briefly want to understand the story, Lance Reventlo was the son of the heiress Barbara Hutton from the Woolworth fortune. And she gave her son a very large sum of money for, I think it was his 25th birthday or something like that, as the story goes. And he was a playboy. He was like the, think of the most playboy kind of guy in the world back in the late 1950s, wanted to be a race car driver. So he started his own company in Los Angeles called Scarab. And what he did is he built 3 Formula One cars and I think 6 GT cars. And out of the 3 Formula One cars, he himself raced this car. This is one of the 2 that raced.
Is this number 1 or number 2?
This is number 2. Number 1 is the one that was owned by Chuck Day, not by Chuck Day, by Don Orozco, who recently passed away. He owned the number 1 car. This is the number 2 car. And this particular car was raced in several races around the world, including the Monaco Grand Prix. And that's where the Sterling Moss scenario comes in. So being the very wealthy playboy and very famous, when Lance Reventlo entered the Scarab in the Monaco Grand Prix that year, he went up to Sterling Moss for Friday practice and said, look, I know that, you're driving for somebody else, all that, but I really would love your opinion. Would you take my car out on Friday practice, drive it and give me your opinion? And there's an interview by Sterling Moss, which I'll send you, and a photograph of him driving this car in Monaco. You can see the photograph, but there's also an online interview with Sterling Moss talking about driving the Scarab, which the car itself in period wasn't competitive. And they finally realized there was an issue with the engine that was later resolved. And then it became extremely competitive in the historic races. But this car has raced also in Goodwood. It's got a great pedigree.
Now, I was going to ask you about that. Did you drive it in Goodwood?
I did not. I didn't drive it at Goodwood. It was driven in Goodwood. I think it was 2000. Maybe it was 2008, because it should be on the car. You see the sticker there, but it's been driven in historic events. And then the car, when I found it, because I went searching for this car all over, I found it in Riverside, which is where Lance Reventlo and Carroll Shelby and all these guys did all their racing out at the Riverside Raceway. And they had a museum there. And the car was in that museum for several years. and I bought it from the owner right from the museum where it was on display. My intent was to race the car in Europe, and had gotten it, in my museum, and it was such a lovely piece. And then I got to that point where I sort of backed away from racing and said, I'm not going to race anymore. So I just kept it as a beautiful showpiece, because it also has one really unique thing that none of the other Scarabs have. It is the only one that still has the original Desmodromic engine that was built in Los Angeles, was built for the race car in period that it was raced with. The other two cars don't have that engine, and it's still in full operating condition, race ready. And when the car was restored, because like all these race cars, it was crashed more than once, I think, but it was professionally restored, and the restoration was done, and I think it was supervised, but certainly included many of the team members who built the car originally, as well as Phil Remington, who's now much more famous after people realized he was the engineering powerhouse behind the GT40 and the Shelby Cobras and the Shelby Daytonas. He was involved in all of that. He was Shelby's right-hand man, but he actually came from working on the Scarabs. And as you look under the hood, you'll see his signature along with everybody else's who did the professional restoration on this car. So just a stunning piece. And as a race car driver, my only regret is I never took it out on the track because I stopped racing before I had the chance to.
Well, it's a most beautiful piece. Will you do me a favor and spell that motor for me? Because we have Offenhauser engine on the description, so it's...
Yeah, no, that's something that the Offenhauser engines were the ones that the other two cars raced. The Desmodromic engine...
Spell the one that you talked about so we can write it down and correct that.
I'll send you a text message because I can't spell.
Okay, well, go ahead.
I'm still working on Tony. Since it's been my name all these years, I'm trying to spell it right. And I make a mistake every now and then. So, what can I say? But yes, I will text you that and send you the information about it. So there's actually
along with those pictures, if you have the pictures, so we can put them in this piece.
Yeah, I do have the photos. I thought I sent you that photo, but I'll also send you the interview where Sterling Moss was interviewed about the day he drove this car.
Well, do me a favor, if you can get that stuff to me, the sooner I get it, the better right now, because the world is looking at us. So we gotta have it. All right, so we're gonna move to the next one. We've talked about a couple of your race cars, but something that I kind of think is kind of neat is these Lotus cars you have. You've got quite a collection of Lotuses. And so why don't you tell us a little bit? I know we've got several different desirable styles of Lotus cars in this collection. And so let's start out with the 61 Lotus 2022 F1 car. Can you tell us a little bit more about that other than what we already know, which is the bullet points? Give us the story why you like these F1 cars and why you started dealing with Lotus cars.
Well, here, it's kind of an interesting story. Again, with all my racing in Europe, unlike most people who grew up karting and then grew up after karting, they started racing Formula 2000s or Formula Fords and then Formula 3000s and eventually worked their way up to Formula One. I was working with Ferrari on lots of other things. And when they decided to start the F1 Cliente program, they came to me and said, we'd like you to be the first customer to buy a car in the new program. There are other people who have been driving the cars before that, but in this new program. So I went directly into Formula One. I sort of skipped all that early racing because I just sort of had a knack for it. And I loved it. But one day, one of my best friends, Larry Kinch, who's also got a beautiful collection of cars, was in F1 Cliente. He had some of these Lotuses in his collection, which were called Formula Juniors. So there were different series with Formula Junior and Formula One back in the 1960s. And he said, Tony, you've got to learn how to drive these cars because they'll teach you to be a better driver. They're the best experience in the world. And I'm looking at him going, yeah, but they're tiny. And how exciting can that be? Oh my God, were they exciting? I learned how to slide a car. I learned how to drive a car better than ever in any other car I've ever raced by driving that car. And so when you look at the formula, and I'll start with it in a way, it's like there are Formula Juniors and Formula Ones. And the primary difference between the two in that period, it was the same chassis, whether it was a 20, a 2022, or a 22, the Lotuses all were the same body, the same chassis. The only difference between the F1 cars and the Formula Juniors was a larger displacement engine and bigger rear wheels. So
Yeah, I was gonna say tire size, yeah.
yeah, the tire size. So I didn't start with the F1. I actually started with the juniors, and I bought my first one. And then I thought, well, I better buy a second one, because if you're a race driver, you'll know there's nothing worse than going to a track, having a car problem, and then sitting around all weekend. So I bought two, so I could always know that I'd have a car. So I got a 22. It's one of the ones we'll talk about, and a 2022. And I started falling in love with it. And then, of course, my buddy Larry, he's like, yeah, but I finished the race. Now I'm going to the Formula One, and you have to sit on the sides. And I'm going, wait, I want a Formula One. And they were more expensive, but I was like, okay. So I started looking for one, and I came across it in an auction where they didn't know what it was. And I went ahead and did the research on it. And this particular Lotus 2022 was originally a Formula Junior, like they all were. And then it became an F1 car, and it was raced in the New Zealand Grand Prix Formula One race by a very famous driver, a New Zealand driver. And oh my God, just for a second, the name escapes me. I'll have to come back to that part. Anyway, a Palmer. Why am I having a problem? Palmer. Anyway, I'll get the name, and I'll give you that detail. But anyway, he raced it in this race, and he raced in this race against some of the most famous drivers, like God. See, now you got me going down a path I lost track for a second.
That's fine. Just take a breath here just a second and just relax. We got all the time in the world.
Anyway, it was a 1961 New Zealand Grand Prix. They outfitted the car in his stable of cars. And there was, years ago, people thought, well, this is that one, this one. So I traced it back, and I got documentation that shows this was the actual car that was raced in New Zealand by him, sanctioned as a Formula One, and FIA registered as a Formula One car. So that car became the car that I wanted to race. But to race it, someone had already converted it back to a Formula Junior, put the smaller tires and a Formula Junior engine in it. So I reached out.
It didn't make sense to go back.
Right. So what I did is I said, no. This car is much more valuable. It's a Formula One car. So I contracted the #1 Lotus guy in England. I think it was Jeff Richardson, and I'll again verify that. And my buddy Larry, who used it for years, I said, I need the Formula One engine back in this car. He built it from the ground up, brand new, redone the entire engine in the car, and it's literally perfect. And outside of testing the engine, it's never been driven yet. So it's still race ready and brand new. I installed it in the car, where it's now sitting in my house in Germany. The engine got installed, and by the time I went to go race it, all these other things had happened. And like I said, I had just retired from racing. So I have this beautiful car that is so rare, as a 61 F1 with a brand new engine in it. So whoever gets this car is going to have this incredible, like, super fast Formula One car that qualifies for the European and US FIA F1 championship.
Yeah, that's amazing. And now that car is located in Germany and will be sold in Germany at your location at the prime of the sale. We have 2 cars over there, correct?
We actually have 3 cars there.
Or 3 cars, excuse me, yeah, right. And then we have the Schumacher motorhome, but yes.
Exactly. And while I'm on it, I might as well go to the Lotus 22,
Right.
which was the first of the Lotuses I bought. And just so people get the distinction of what those cars are, what that means, a Lotus 20 was the first iteration of the Lotus cars. Since the first one was a Lotus 18, and they switched from the Lotus 18 to the Lotus 20, where they took this body style, the rear engine, and they had, I believe it was drum brakes in the back and discs in the front, if my memory serves correct. So what they did is they started taking the 20s for racing the next season, putting the disc brakes all the way around, and they made it a Lotus 2022. Then they evolved it to a much slightly different but more improved version of that car called the Lotus 22. And the 22 itself is the first one I ever bought. I bought it from a guy in France who successfully raced it. It's the first one I got in and raced that I owned. And I took it out at, I think it was Silverstone was the first place I took it out. I have to check. I got in the car and it taught me how to drive. It really did. It taught me how to completely drive on a racetrack in a different way than I had in Formula One. And anybody who wants to become a phenomenal driver in a very safe car, for what it is in 1961, the Lotus 20s and 20 and 22s are great cars. So I got this French car, and that's when I went to go look for a 2022 and a 2022 spare for US, so I didn't have to ship cars back and forth. So I ended up with my F1 and my 22 in Europe, and in the United States, I bought 2 more 2022s, and those are the 2 that are most of the way through a full restoration, but I raced them before that. I raced the 22 all over Europe. It raced in the where they had the Formula One race last weekend in the Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort. I raced it there. Phenomenal track for this car. So I raced it all over Europe. The car is in great shape. It's still race ready. You can get in it, take it out onto a track and drive it tomorrow. It's got, I think I've got spares of tires and things with it in Germany. And then the 2022s are, I got them. They're here in the United States. They're halfway through restoration. They'll be beautifully done. The new owners can pick the color scheme of the cars. Although I'm fond of the Lotus green. That's that British racing green. That's Lotus's color.
If they want to paint it pink and yellow, they can.
You know, we'll paint the cars part of the sale. And we're going to finish the restoration on those 2 cars. So they'll be going out with brand new cars on either of those 61 2022s.
All right, that is, I mean, and I got to tell you, I'm like you. I like the green. I think that's where they need to stay, and hopefully the new owner will be just as discerning as you and I about the quality and the preservation of those cars. I absolutely love them, and the more I talk to you about them, the more I want to buy one myself, and maybe buy 2, and me and you go challenge each other, because I'm an old dirt track racer. And so when you start talking about tire size and we start talking about modified versus super late models, I understand fully how good a driver it can make you. And so I want to go race with you one day. We may have to go do that. So.
We may have to do that. It'll be kind of fun to watch how a guy can slide on the dirt and then how one can slide on the track. And we'll see where we end at the end.
That's exactly, see where we wind up sideways. That's right. Well, we've talked a lot about your cars that you've started learning to drive in. But there's another unique car that's in your collection. It's the 2003 Lola B02 2-seater, the Marc Genet car. I hope I pronounced that right. The F1 driver from Le Mans, a winning driver from Le Mans. Tell us about that car. That's kind of a unique deal, especially I didn't know they had 2-seaters that you could ride around in Le Mans with. So.
Well, I'll clarify all that. So first of all, number one is, you know, this car's got an incredible history and it's a very special car, and it is a one of one of this type. This is a Formula 3000, which was the feeder series into F1. And Formula 3000s, like the single-seater one we had, both of those cars were specifically designed to be the last car driven by a future F1 driver in a series prior to launching their F1 career. And so the Formula 3000s were raced on all the same tracks. They're the same type of cars. And in this particular situation, Marc Genet, who's a longtime friend of mine and one of the, in my opinion, one of the best drivers and certainly one of the best instructors in the world. Marc Genet was the Ferrari Formula One driver. He was the support driver for Ferrari for many, many years, still works there as a backup driver and as their F1 Cliente representative, meaning any private client F1 person is going to get trained by Marc Genet, but he also trains the current F1 drivers. So with Sebastian Vettel, when he was at Ferrari, when Fernando Alonso was at Ferrari, when right now with Leclerc, with Carlos Sainz and these types of people, Marc is part of their team that when they go out, he's helping them to improve their driving. He's meticulous that way. He also, though, raced previously in Formula One for BMW. And most importantly, for me, he raced in Le Mans. And that was a different car he raced in Le Mans. In Le Mans, what he was racing was the prototypes, the top class of Le Mans. and he raced, when he won, he raced for Peugeot. And I've got a beautiful poster and picture of him up there. And I was there for him when he raced multiple times in Le Mans. And he won. He took fifth, fourth, third, second, and then eventually won Le Mans and first place for Peugeot. He's a phenomenal driver. So outside of all of those things, Mark would do private training and things like this. And he had some very good clients and some professional type drivers that needed to get an experience in an open wheel F1 type car. So he had this Lola, this F3000, built to train other drivers. And so when Mark had this car, he used it to specifically take out on these sessions, put drivers in the back seat and say, now this is how you take the line. This is how you take the track. This is what you do here and what you do there. And he used it for several years as a training car, unlike the ones that you see for demos and other things out there. This car was purposely set up for Mark to be able to train other drivers. And after a while, he and I became really good friends, and we started doing a lot of racing together, and he was training me. And I really said, I'd love to have this car. And I said, because I'd love to be able to use it for my own purposes, because everybody always asked me to train them how to learn how to drive an open wheel car. And so after a couple of years of badgering him, he finally sold me the car. And I brought it to the States. But even before I brought it to the States, I took it to Barcelona. Mark came out. We took some of the doctors that I've trained in surgery and in cardiology. We took them out to the Barcelona track. We put them in the back seat, gave them the ride of their life, probably scared them half to death.
Give him the ride of his life.
Yeah, it was like a whoa moment for them. But anyway, after doing that, I brought it to the United States and, did several race events with the car, but decided that the most valuable thing I could do with this car was charity. And so I didn't change anything about the car, just converted it to have a screen in the back so the people in the back seat could see and some communication with me. And what we ended up doing with this car was I would go to charities, auction off for charity rides in this car to raise money for what was one of the charities close to us, which was called Duchenne's. It's the worst form of muscular dystrophy that only boys can get. And ironically, if you know the story of Enzo Ferrari, when Enzo Ferrari died, his son died, his name was Dino Ferrari, or Alfa Dino.
Right. Yes, sir.
This is the disease he died of. He died of Duchenne's, which was a form of muscular dystrophy. And I thought it was very appropriate to take a car like this. And so for several years, we used it for these charitable functions. And again, having retired out of racing, I think it's a great car to take out and, which was competitive originally, then converted for this training purpose as the only one made so that a professional Formula One and Le Mans driver could literally go out and train other people, is an amazing car. And it's got this incredible engine in it that is easy to drive. It's almost like a car you get in to drive to work. You turn it on, drive it, but it's got all the horsepower and you can just drive it anywhere.
And that's the Zytec Judd engine?
Oh, you broke up. I couldn't hear you.
Is that the Zytec Judd engine?
I believe this one has the Zytec Judd engine in it. Or was this the BMW engine?
I show on my description. The description shows Zytec Judd F3000 3.0 liter.
Oh yeah, okay. So it's not Judge, it's Judd, Judd. It's a Judd engine.
Okay.
Of course I can't, but
yeah.
Yeah. So it's a 3 liter and it's really designed in a way where it doesn't require the kind of level of care that a Formula One engine does. It's high performance, but you actually run it almost like a high performance GT car and less like a Formula One engine. So but it gives you the experience. One of the other provenances of this car that's so important, and I didn't think of it when we were talking earlier. One of the most important provenances of this car is I've done development work for Ferrari, designing special stuff for the Formula One team over the years, related to things in aerodynamics, related to things in tires, and even some special equipment just for Michael Schumacher. And in my time in doing that type of development, we had been developing a very incredible aerodynamic system. And we used 2 of my cars as the test bed for the Ferrari F1 car to do this. And specifically, this Lola, both of these 2 Lolas were used for the F1 test bed for this aerodynamic system. And we did this testing both in Paul Ricard and in, I'm trying to remember what the other track we did it in, to prove out this technology and how it worked, which made a big difference in Formula One. So these were the actual
So
official test beds.
not only are they nice cars, but they're also test mules for some really up-to-date upgrade aerodynamics that you were testing at the time for those cars. Continuing on with these Formula One cars, here's another one that just kind of sneaks into the group. Your 1983 Ram Mach 1. You know, it's the Kenny Atchison's Jacques Villeneuve senior car, you know, from 1983. That thing, when it just oozes history when you're standing around it. Give us a little bit of a story and background about that car.
Yeah, you know, it's again, another great story behind a Formula One car. So again, I was racing and constantly, again, watching one of my best friends saying, okay, well, you finished your race. I'm going to go in the next race with my other car. And I'm going, well, I can't drive in that race. I don't have one of those. And so I started searching for a proper DFV engined, you know, competitive 80s, you know, pre-86 Formula One. This is considered to be one of the most exciting series for gentlemen drivers, is because it's proper Formula One. I'm talking about the years of Niki Lauda. You know, when you watch that movie Rush, this car was raced in that period. Oh, yeah, and I mean, these are all the famous real drivers, Jackie Stewart, all these guys. They raced in these cars, and these are real race cars. These are not Sunday driving cars. You take this out on the track, and you're driving like Niki Lauda, you know. And this car, I wanted something that would be FIA registered to race in this series, but would also be competitive. And so I searched around, and I found the car in Australia. It's a March Ram, and for a lot of people who don't know, March is probably one of the top competitive race cars for many, many years in Formula One. And this March Ram was one of a couple of this series. And when this car was raced in period, it also didn't win as well as it should have, because the engine they had in it was flawed, and they realized that it was set wrong. Again, another car that when it came out of period, it went into Masters Historics and it won the championship. It was phenomenal. But what's unique about it is who drove it and why. Kenny Atchison was a well-known driver back in period. He was one of the guys. There were 3 different drivers, but the most important driver was a guy named Jacques Villeneuve Sr. And a lot of people know the history. Gilles Villeneuve, Gilles was his brother. Gilles Villeneuve was Ferrari Formula One champion, really amazing driver, probably considered one of the best Ferrari drivers of all time. And he had a son named Jacques Villeneuve, who also became a world champion Formula One driver. And so he was named after Jacques Villeneuve Sr. So most people know him by name. But what Jacques Villeneuve Sr. became famous for was he was a snowmobile race car driver up in Canada. And he would win all these snowmobile races. And they wanted him to come drive a Formula One car at the Canadian Grand Prix. So he got sponsored, of course, by Canadian Tire and ended up in the Canadian Grand Prix. That was his first real F1 drive. And unfortunately, he didn't have enough sponsorship to stay in the series and went back to snowmobile racing. But this car became very coveted and, like I said, won really well. It also had a completely rebuilt engine. I've only put, I think, 5 events on the engine after it was rebuilt. So it's, again, very low time on the DFE engines. These engines are the engine of that period. Almost all of the Formula One cars in that period used this engine, unless it was a Ferrari, which would only use a Ferrari engine. But most of them use this engine. And the car has a ton of spares. I mean, I've got extra bodywork. As a matter of fact, I even acquired the molds for the bodywork. So if you go out, bang it up and race it, and you got to make a new panel, it actually comes with the molds, spare rims and tires, spare noses, spare wings, all the accessories. It's an amazing car. I've flown it all over the world. And for me, my first experience in this car, I had it delivered to me the day I took delivery was in Portugal at a track I'd never been on, in a car I'd never experienced. And I got in the car, qualified third, and won the race. As a matter of fact, it was so funny because it was such an amazing race, and my mechanics had no expectation I was going to win, and they were surprised when I qualified. And after about 3 laps, because when the green flag came out and I took off, I'm like, did I go early? Because nobody's behind me. And I'm driving and I look at the boards and I'm like asking them, is the race over? Did I miss something? Because I've never seen another car yet. And they're just going, keep going, keep going, keep going. I'm like, okay, I'm just racing. It was so lovely to drive. And it wasn't until the last lap that I actually saw one guy in my rearview mirror, and I still won the race. And I got to go up on the podium. First time I stood on a podium in Formula One. And you know, you get your flag, they hang your flag up. It took 20 minutes for them to find an American flag because they had no chance. They didn't think I had a chance of winning the race. I got the trophy sitting right up here. They couldn't find the flag. Finally, they got the flag. They played the American anthem, which again, I think they had to search for it. And so needless to say, I fell in love with the car. I won second in my class in the Canadian Grand Prix. Would have taken first, except my mechanic forgot to put clutch fluid in, and I had to power shift it for the last 2 laps, but still made second. But if you want to race in the Masters, and the Masters is a phenomenal series, if anybody out there wants to race in it, you know, you're not going to have to spend $1 million to get an F1 car. This is a much more reasonable car, and it's inexpensive to run compared to like a Ferrari. And of all the other ones, it's got great provenance, great drivers. Even Nelson Piquet Jr., who raced Formula One for Renault, he took this car, he took it and did some racing with this car. It's got just such a great history, but it's also super competitive, and it's a beautiful car. If you just want to put one in your collection, it's got some great history, but if you want to drive it, this is the car you want.
Be sure you send me some pictures if you got of them, of you holding that flag up. That'd be great for this story.
I can find those. I was thinking about that the other day. I got to find out.
At least the trophy. Send me a picture of the trophy. Send me a picture of the trophy.
I can grab the trophy right now and show it to you if you want to see.
No, just send me a picture of it on the phone so we can put it in with it. We're going to go over this while you're talking. A lot of it will be pictures of the car and stuff like that with your voice in the background. So
there's one more point of reference too. I took the car down to the U.S. Grand Prix in Austin and raced it there twice. Both times it poured down rain. As a matter of fact, you talk about hurricanes. We literally practically had a hurricane during this was just during the regular Formula One race, the pre-race, coming down that giant front straightaway. It was like a waterfall, and we're driving in the rain. And so it was under a yellow flag, but you know, still it was an amazing event. But the car has been to Austin twice.
Oh, that's awesome. All right, so now we've got past every Formula One that I think we can talk about, with the exception of the Formula Mazda.
And the Volpini. The Volpini, the Volpini is a Formula Junior, that red one in Germany.
So yeah, so why don't we go ahead and talk about the Volpini, since it's at the top of the list, one of 3 cars, and tell us a little bit about that one real quick.
It's a 1960 Volpini. Technically, it's like a 1956 Volpini.
Do we have battery issues or something? Y'all keep looking at this camera. Right?
Sure.
Can you check and make sure JD's battery in his heart is still working?
Oh, my battery in my heart is just pumping away. I'm so excited about this. So, all right, so we've talked about, I mean, your stable is endless.
Let me tell you about the Volpini.
Yeah, your stable is endless with these F1 cars, and every time I think we're done talking about F1, another one comes up, and this one is an actual one of 3 car, your Volpini, your 58 Volpini, Formula 1 of 3. Tell us more about that.
So again, I was in Formula Juniors. I was finding they were so exciting, and you know, I know it sounds repetitive, but it was that same sort of thing. Okay, I had my my Lotuses, and I'm racing in the 61 class. But there's a class before that, the front engines, like we talked about with where the Scarab would be. And they also had Formula Juniors for those. And the most beautiful cars out there that everybody says in the front engine Formula cars of that period was the Maserati 250S. The Maserati long nose Formula car was so beautiful. Well, there was a lot of Italian builders, and this one really successful race driver, he built this car company, Volpini. They built 3 Formula Junior front engine cars to compete. They were very successful in competing with these cars. And I'll never forget the day I walked into a garage at a track, and I saw this car, not this one, but one of the other 3 was this Volpini. And it was fast. And I watched the guy win, and I said, I got to have one of those. And I just, and it was one of those things like, you know, when you buy a new car and it's you wanted it for a while and you put it in your garage, you wake up in the middle of the night, you come out, you look at it, you go back to sleep, you come back and you look at it again, you go, that's mine. That's my car.
Yes. Well, I think we all have that sickness.
Oh yeah. And all weekend long, I'm got all my fantastic race cars. And I just kept going over there, like rubbing this car, like going, this is the most beautiful little race car I have ever seen. And so the guy told me, he said, look, there's not, that mine's not for sale. The other one's not for sale, but there is one. The guy's going to be at the next race. He's bringing the car. He wasn't planning on selling it, but if you go talk to him, you might be able to talk him out of it because I think he's getting past that point of racing. And so sure enough, I signed up for the next race, came in, the guy had the car, and I'm like Googling over it. Worst thing you can do when you want to buy a car, like,
Right.
yeah, you know, this car is not my favorite color. It's not, no, I'm like going, oh my God, can I buy your car? Can I buy your car? So needless to say, you know, I had to buy it. Anyway, it was so lovely. The guy gave me the history of, you know, hey, I won this race. He told me the background of Volpini, the cars, where they were made. It shows you on inside in there, the stickers and all the other stuff, all the events that it had been at. And it had been owned by a guy who was, what was he? He had a title. He was like, I'd have to look it up. He was not a duke. He was something. Yeah, he had some kind of official title. Anyway, he was the one who raced the car in period. Anyway, I bought the car, drove it twice, sent it to, it was a Pierce Racing in the UK. The guy who does all the E-types, D-types, C-types, gave him the car and said, I want to race in Silverstone. Restore, I want the gearbox, I want the engine, I want the chassis, I want everything to be made brand new so I can drive the car in Silverstone, which is the most classic and important Formula. Yeah. And so he prepped the car, got it ready, he ran the car for me. Actually, let one of my other friends use my Lotuses that weekend and say, you race the Lotuses, I'm taking this Volpini out. I raced that thing around the track with a smile so big on my face, I think I swallowed bugs through my helmet. It was a ton of fun. Raced it several times. It's in excellent condition. If you look at a car that fits into that race class, this is the car you want to drive. It's easy to control, yet it's fast. But what you really get out of this car is you're almost probably never going to see another one. And everybody who looks at it will ask you that same question. That's so rare. Is that either if they're in Europe, they'll ask you if it's a Volpini. If they're in the US, they'll say, is that the Maserati? And I'll go, no, that's the Volpini. So it's just an uber valuably rare car that you wouldn't be able to buy, probably would never have a chance to buy one other than here, because I don't think the other two, I don't think they'll be for sale for any period of time I know of.
And this is also in Germany, and it's going to be sold in Germany and can be picked up at your home there in Germany.
Yes, it's in my museum in Germany, and it's there with the other 2 Lotuses.